Hi everyone, this is Ali John Chaudhary, psychotherapist, and I'm here today with Fern Schumer Chapman, author. And today's episode on brothers, sisters, strangers is going to be an unusual episode because we're going to be doing a case study. And this is the first time we're taking a question from a viewer, and we hope that we're going to be able to do this segment every now and then, having some of our viewers come in with some questions so that way we can attempt to answer them and help them to empower themselves in their process. So this is great that we're able to do this whole episode on in-laws and sibling estrangement. So thank you so much for being here, Fern. Wonderful to have you here.
Great to be here. And this is such an important topic. Siblings and in-laws. So it's important to recognize that there are perilous moments in a sibling relationship, in the life of a sibling relationship. It always occurs when there's a new stage. So when somebody goes off to college. Well, the big one is when somebody gets married. And part of the issue is, how will this new person fit into the family? Is he or she anything like other family members? Can a sister or brother cultivate a warm relationship with this new in-law? And of course, then there are the really unfortunate situations where somebody has decided that they don't want to fit into the family and have decided that they will remove the spouse from the original family. And that's really crushing.
Absolutely. I completely agree when the family dynamics change because of an in-law and such, and how they can exercise influence onto a brother or sister, especially. So that's something we're going to attempt to address today. I really appreciate that we're able to sit down on this. And the case study we were given here was this is from one of our participants in the Facebook group. She had mentioned this to me here, and I'm just going to read it here. It says, sibling rivalry was present with both my parents. They had 4 kids. Because of this, there wasn't enough individual time together, although they did the best they could. I'm close to one brother, the diplomat in the family, but estranged from another brother. He was the rebel in the family, lacked involvement, and now blames everyone now that his personal life exploded. The youngest brother is cold, logical, selfish, and didn't value his sibling relationship enough, nor was he able or available when mom needed help. So that's the general situation. And I have the 3 questions that she's been asking here, which is, why use estrangement when better choices were available? Number 1. Number 2, how do you deal constructively with a situation where a sibling issues the ultimatum, take sides or I'll cut you out of my family? And number 3, why would a sibling think it's appropriate to let his ice-cold bullying spouse stick her beak into his family affairs? So that's the 3rd question.
Well, let's start with number 1. Can you repeat number 1?
Yes. Why use estrangement when better choices were available? So that's an important one to look at. And I think that some of this, what comes up with this, is the whole notion of recognizing that there's different factors that bring this up. And one of them is refusal to look in. You know, some in-laws have difficulties when it comes to managing feelings, and it's much more easy to blame other people than to actually look inwards and do some self-improvement. And when this happens, well, usually cutoffs aren't far behind, you know, and people, when they experience fallout because of this, it's almost as if it makes them feel as though they've said or did something wrong, which is just not often the case, you know.
Well, also, they may not have the same goals that you have.
Mm-hmm.
You know, your goal is to have an improved relationship with your sibling, but maybe the spouse's goal is to have improved relationships with her side of the family or his side.
Yeah.
So, you know, it's hard to say, but I think it's dangerous to think that what you want is what they want.
Absolutely. And that's the thing that happens, is that there can be differing needs here that are present, or different situations playing themselves out. You know, another situation that happens here is the lack of conflict resolution strategies in the family of origin. You know, so if that's the case, if there in some families one pattern of conflict management happens that they just brush things under the carpet, then, for example, that can be the dominant way in dealing with things. So if they tend to do that, then of course eruptions will happen invariably in families Or worse, what can happen is that people just shut down, become non-responsive, and such. So this is the type of situation that can cause breakdowns in communication, especially.
Right. They were raised in a completely different culture. So now you're asking that this person fit neatly into your culture. And those things can conflict.
Absolutely. And of course, opinions as an extension of ourselves, right? And it's been demonstrated that people tend to hang on to their political view like it's an extension of themselves, right? So when disagreements come up, it's choosing other than our siblings' way of seeing things can be seen as an affront to them, right?
Right.
So that's
Yeah.
another thing to consider.
You know, in extreme cases, you sometimes, as I alluded to earlier, don't see a partnership, but you see a kind of appropriation in the marriage. In other words, my husband is mine now, and you have to deal with that. And I'm not particularly interested in promoting relations with his family of origin.
Yeah,
And that makes it really tricky. You
it does.
can't change that.
Yeah, it does, right? And that's the whole issue, right? You can't fix something that's not in your control. So, and we'll discuss some of that later on as we get into some different things that we can work on. So, another one that we of course can see is a lack of emotional maturity as well, right?
Mhm.
And this is
Mhm.
something that happens when one family member has like a disagreement with someone else, and what happens in some ways it can generate all sorts of different things. And when people tend to come from a position of emotional immaturity, they can act more selfishly, right? And tend to focus more on their own individual needs rather than seeing the greater good of a situation.
Right. And the very nature of marrying somebody is that you are creating a new family, and siblings tend to invest in their families rather than back into the family of origin. So there's another conflict.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. So I think that that's just something to consider, of course, in light of that. Another thing that happens, of course, is the avoidance of emotional vulnerability, right? And if vulnerability is not acknowledged or individual needs aren't being met, then the wound that can cause in some people is the fact of pushing others away, that they create less vulnerable moments because vulnerable moments can be painful, so you can see this in the example that's brought up, in the case study where it's like it basically says, for example, you hurt me, so I leave instead of taking it out or talking it out proactively, right? So there's this ultimatum that's dropped instead of working issues out.
Right. And also, we've discussed toxic positivity, but that's another expression of this where people simply don't want to go very deep. They have different styles of communicating, and it also controls the level of intimacy.
Absolutely. That's the thing that happens with all of this, of course, So there's the presence of disagreeable traits as well, right? If a sibling or their wife or husband has a strong personality or a trait of disagreeableness, then that can influence the outcome when it comes to any attempt at resolving issues, right? So the need to be right is what supersedes most of anything else, right?
Right.
Yeah.
I think too, this is a good moment for me to just mention that in some cases, this becomes so extreme that it's actually abuse.
Yeah.
So what the spouse is doing is removing the sibling from the family and severing those relationships so that the spouse no longer gets support or hears other opinions, and that falls into the category of abuse.
Yeah, exactly. So that's
They're
the thing.
isolating them.
Yeah, that's right, And that kind of leads me to the other point, which is the idea that sometimes, some people, once they get in a relationship with somebody, they're really not going to be wanting to foster conflict at home. So what they do is they wash their hands, if you will, of any situation that can happen, so they avoid pushback or negative emotion or attention onto them, right?
Right. They may be walking on eggshells in their own marriage and they don't want any more trouble. And they become kind of spineless and weak, refusing to stand up for the family members from their original family.
Exactly. So, so let's talk about what we can do in some ways, right? Because the question that the viewer had was like, how do you deal constructively with a situation where a sibling issues the ultimatum, take sides, or I'll cut you out of my family, right? So already there's an attempt at weaponizing the situation with that very statement. It implies that if you don't agree with them, you're against them, which is wrong.
It's emotional blackmail.
Yeah. So I always like to think that it's important to try to cultivate relationships individually if you can, you know. So there's a difference between meeting people alone versus when they're in a group, right? So if you choose to meet with them alone, if they're open to that, then you're exercising goodwill and you're not taking sides, right? So I think that that's what's important, right? Because people get more into fight mode when they can be in a group just to be heard, right?
That's an interesting point. Yeah, I mean, of course, you have to hope that that sibling is willing to have a relationship independent of their spouse.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's the whole issue, right? That's that the willingness has to be there. I think that avoiding contentious subjects also is something that can foster an optimal contact. I think surface level conversations can be key before going and diving deeper into anything else. So if you keep the conversation going at some level in that way, then that's good if you're able to do that. So that's important, right?
As you have said to me in other situations, a limited relationship is preferable to none at all.
Exactly. Exactly. And like you were saying earlier, right? You can't force someone to like you or to participate with you in, you know, in a get together. So, you know, if they refuse to see you, then you have to acknowledge that and adjust yourself to that, like you were saying. And I think that adjusting ourselves to their lack of presence in our life has been the challenge that all of us are working on when it comes to sibling estrangement. So,
Right. What I said to you when you asked me, what do I think uh, a sibling can do in this situation? I said, not much and a lot. Well, what do I mean by that? Not much, because you can't control somebody else's reaction to you or investment in you, but you can do a lot in terms of creating well-being in your own life and finding a way to live comfortably, which means lowering expectations and accepting this for what it is. And those things are very difficult to do. They're easy to say and difficult to do,
yeah.
but absolutely necessary.
I completely agree. I think that that's really important to recognize where you can put efforts into it. And I always come back to the terms of talking about the process and not the content. So if you're initiating a dialogue with someone, it's always good to talk about what's going on rather than necessarily the issue or the heart of the matter. So a good way to do that is to say, well, when we start to get like this, it really makes me sad. Or one of the things I admire most in you is in your ability to address contentious issues. So when you're saying that, you're not talking about the material they're bringing up necessarily so much as their way of doing things. So already you're coming at it from a proactive rather than reactive way, if there's an open dialogue, right? And
I like that too, because by nature, siblings are extremely competitive. And so if you can find something positive to say that recognizes the way in which they're relating to you, you're already a step ahead in the game.
mm-hmm, exactly. So that's really important. And I think that remembering not to personalize this onto yourself also is important. You know, that if there's an ultimatum that's been posed, that it's important that we not make it about ourselves. You know, and if there's no fixing this, then recognize that it's important how you can make peace with this particular point, right?
Right.
So,
And that is why we're here. How can we make peace with this very difficult loss?
absolutely. So I'm just looking at the time here. We're almost out of time, Fern. So on a final note, what I wanted to say is that we had another question from this viewer, and we may need to address that perhaps in a future episode. And the question she had was, what are some constructive ways to deal with in-laws whose bullying behaviors trigger the same sickening emotions I had years ago with some people in grade school. So that's a very deep question, and I'd rather that we delve into that at another time. But that is certainly something that would be helpful for a number of us in our community. So
Right. This tweezing out what is happening in the moment and what is being triggered from past experiences.
yeah, so that's an important one we'll have to address at another time. Certainly a good question to explore. So, Fern, what would be the number one resource you would have that you would suggest to our listeners and viewers?
I think I'm going to go with Brothers, Sisters, Strangers, which is my memoir that also includes other people's experiences as well as social science research on the topic of sibling estrangement.
Yeah, it's a good resource. Yeah. And of course, my number one resource right now is the Improving Self-Esteem with My Sibling Estrangement workshop. I'm doing that right now, and I am open to having other people participate into some of the next cohorts, which I'm going to be building now. So I do invite people to contact me if they want to be part of this. The pricing and such is all available in terms of details for each sessions. It's all available on siblingestrangement.com in the group section. So if you scroll down, you'll see a description, and you can find the details about that. So thank you so much for doing this again, Fern. It's wonderful to have you here. It's wonderful to be able to address these issues that are so relevant to the people that listen and view our videos. So
great to be with you. And there's so many tentacles to sibling estrangement. We have plenty for topics as well as workshops.
absolutely. I look forward to doing more of this with you. So thank you so much, Fern.
Okay, great to be with you.
Okay, I'll talk to you soon. Thanks.
Bye.
Bye-bye.